return on investment, their cash on cash return, and they're minimizing their tenant turnover costs. And while insulation and energy efficiency matter, they are secondary to visual upgrades like kitchens, bathrooms, those types of upgrades. I don't know of a real estate appraiser, at least in our state, that values anything on property based upon energy efficiency. So those are secondary, right? And that's what the bank is going to be looking at. That's what the building owner is looking at, right? Effective engagement means clearly tying tenant benefits back to the energy improvements, right? How is this going to change your net operating income? How can it benefit you? How can it benefit your tenant? And there's many ways we can do that. So you get into some talking points here where it's like, what are the tenant benefits? Lower utility costs, increased comfort, housing stability. Those are all key things that we want to do for these renters, right? They may be moving from these small multifamilies, especially in rural Minnesota. They've got a housing voucher. I lived in this 12 unit, I lived in that 16 unit, I live in this 20 unit. They may be bouncing around. We want to try to make some housing stability for them, right? Some of the owner benefits. You might get some tenant retention due to lower utility bills. If you're a tenant living in a building and I've reduced your utility bills by 10 or 15%, what's the likelihood you want to leave that building? Probably pretty low, right? Increased comfort and appreciation. If you took the time to compartmentalize that unit so you're no longer smelling your neighbor cooking fish, you probably want to stay in that unit, right? So the tenant turnover is likely to be reduced, which will directly impact the net operating income in a positive way. Tenant turnover is a huge expense for property owners, right? That unit's down for a month. They've probably got to pay another month commission to re-rent it. They've got to repair the unit. So they're going to be down 3 months rent every time a tenant leaves. So anything that can tie that tenant to having some stability, staying in that unit and being comfortable is a benefit to the property owner. And this is here, we've got a spot for questions.
Jason, assuming that you do ask for property owner buy down for some of the measures and or contribution, at what point in the process do you ask for that buy down? So you described starting out with attic and wall insulation, and then each conversation you add more stuff. Mm-hmm. How do you integrate that in without it making it seem like a sales pitch? And when do you add that in?
I think you're going to be stuck in kind of a sales pitch as long as you're required to have an owner contribution. We're going to talk a little bit here about owner contributions. What I would say is, in your early stages, don't throw a bunch of paperwork at that property owner. Really look at it as like a, what is the word I'm thinking of? A pre-audit. So I really just want to get in the door with that building owner. I want to pre-audit your building. I want to get to do that initial site visit, walk through and see if it's actually going to be eligible. And then if it is eligible, what we like to do is get the bids ready, get the buy-in, show the owner what we can do with that property, and then that's where we go to look at the contracts. And then we see, okay, what can you commit? It's like my HRA is, that's board approved. So I'd go to the board meeting for the Housing Redevelopment Authority and I'd sit down and say, this is the measures that we have. Could you contribute X amount of dollars? Maybe it's 1,000, maybe it's 2,000, maybe it's 3,000. And I've seen that once I've got the bids in front of the person who makes the decision, sometimes they're willing to pay for measures that aren't related to weatherization. So they're comfortable making contributions. But they really, you gotta get them to a point where they're seeing the scope. Because if you come at them right away and you're like, hey, I need to get $10,000 from you just to start weatherization, they're not gonna be interested in doing that at all. So you really just gotta get them kind of into the process enough so that they can see the bids and see the work starting to come to fruition. And as we get forward and going along in this project, they're gonna start seeing more value and get more buy-in from you as you move forward, which is gonna make that conversation much easier. Good question. Anyone else? We can take one more before we move forward. Okay? So contracts and MOUs. So the property owner agreement, right? So here's where we're talking about owner contribution, right? Can be required per your grantee, can allow for owner contributions. That owner contribution can be a barrier, you know, if the amounts are too high, right? If you're gonna go into a property that's probably struggling and we're gonna ask and demand them to donate a certain amount of dollars to make that project viable, they're probably just gonna turn you down. They're worried about their dollar at the end of the day too. The property owner agreement and the contract, you can do this early on in the phase. So like if you're getting here now, you've done that one-on-one with them with that presentation, you want to get this contract signed with them, you can do that. I've been able to do that with owners after I've done a couple projects because I'm more comfortable with the process and I can show them work that's been done. I can show them my binders of work that I've done in multifamilies and say, these are the projects we've completed. These are the improvements we did to them. Can we ask you for an owner contribution up front? But once you've got that data, it makes it a little bit easier. On your first one, it's going to be a little bit harder, right? It is going to have that kind of sales pitch mentality to it. You should have an approval process from your grantee to increase sub-grantee confidence. Don't let them go out there alone and do this on their own. Make sure that you're involved in that conversation between the two. OMB guidance tells us to be in constant communication with our grantees, so we should focus on that, right? And then I do have a landlord agreement that we use at our agency. It will be on the website. It's got the owner contribution already built into it, and it's got a tenant signature page so everybody can sign the document, and it can be shared with everyone. So feel free to use it, modify it however you want. So this is where the fun really happens for the tenant. Or maybe it's not fun for them. Depends upon the day, okay? So the initial site visit, you want to make this an event. I like making this an event, okay? You got to understand, you're going into a 12-unit or 16-unit building, whatever size it is, 8-unit, there's probably a common area, so we like to set up in a common area. We want to bring some value to the tenants that are there because we are going into their home and we're disrupting them. We're showing up at 9 o'clock in the morning, maybe they work an overnight shift. Maybe they got to go to work at noon. Maybe they're struggling, whatever that day is. We are disrupting them in their home, and they didn't ask us to be there, right? But we're trying to get them weatherization services. So by making an event, we can provide pamphlets and other resources. I like to provide snacks.